All right. So you might remember last time we saw a number of different sources about Elijah. Um, One of the things that's clear in those sources is that he is a miracle worker, able even perhaps to revive the dead. He's able to take a little bit of oil and flour and make it last, constantly replenish itself. Uh, the other thing that we've seen about him is that he is a zealot for God. We have that showdown with the priests of Baal on the top of Mount Carmel. And he's constantly running for his life, principally from Jezebel. We saw him as someone who is fearless and and concerned about basic morality. We see him judging King Ahab and Jezebel because she managed to impeach an innocent man and have him executed just so that Ahab could take his land. And now we're going to look at really the end of the earthly story, and I'm going to share my screen with you. So what we have here is a source from the Book of Kings. This is the very end of the Elijah story. He departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 oxen before him. He was with the 12th. So this immediately tells us that he is a farmer. He is obviously quite wealthy. He comes from a wealthy family, Elisha, because 12 oxen are a lot of oxen, and they were, of course, quite expensive. Elijah passes by him and casts his mantle upon him. And we had already seen, though I didn't share it with you, that Elisha has been serving Elijah to an extent. He left the oxen, ran after Elijah, and he said, "Let me kiss my father and mother, and I will follow you." So he understands that this is really his commission as Elijah's successor. He has put the mantle of leadership upon him. And this is, of course, where that expression comes from, this story. And Elijah, he says, "Let me kiss my father and my mother." And Elijah says, "Go back, for what have I done to you?" In other words, yes, of course. He returns from following him, took the yoke and oxen and slaughtered them. And with the equipment of the oxen, he cooked the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. So here we see he's compassionate, that is Elisha, and then he goes and he follows Elijah and he ministers to him. When the Lord was about to take Elijah to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." Elisha says, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I won't leave you." So he is devoted to Elijah. They went to Bethel. The sons of the prophets who were in Bethel came to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" So the sons of the prophets, these are these bands of prophets, these ecstatics, and they seem to have this knowledge, perhaps because of the way they put themselves into trances. And he says, again, this is Elisha, "I know," keep silent. And Elijah says, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." Elijah doesn't seem to want Elisha to be there when he goes, but Elisha won't leave him. They come to Jericho, and again we have this scene. Again, the B'nai Nevi'im are telling him he's going to leave you, and he says silent. And then we go to the Jordan, and again we get to the Jordan, And 50 men also went and stood at some distance. And uh, Elijah takes his mantle. Okay, so let me, Myra, you have to mute. uh, he takes his mantle, he rolls it up, he strikes the water parts, and the two of them go on dry land. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you. He says, let there be a double portion of your spirit upon me. Elijah says, you've asked a hard thing. And yet, if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be, it shall be so for you, but if you don't, it will not be so. And they went and talked, and behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up in a whirlwind to heaven. Elisha saw him, and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw them no more. And he took hold of his clothes, and he tore them. This is a sign, of course, of mourning. And he took up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. And when he took the mantle of Elijah, he struck the water, saying, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he struck the water was parted and he went over. So there you have it. I'm going to stop sharing. And we see here to the end that Elijah is a miracle worker. He duplicates in the Jordan what Moses had done and also what Joshua had done. It's worth noting that the Jordan is not very big. It's not like the sea, right? So yes, but it doesn't, Moses is called the greatest of all prophets, right? There is, we say this in Yiddo. There was no one like Moses, no prophet like Moses. Nonetheless, Elijah and Elisha are able to do something like this. The important thing here, and it really serves as the basis for the rabbinic conception of Elijah, is that he doesn't die. He's taken to heaven in this chariot. And why that is important is because the rabbis will see Elijah as coming back, coming down to earth. Um, and he will have actually a very important role to play at the end of time as the harbinger of the Messiah. We'll come to that. So we're going to move in a minute to the rabbinic conceptions of Elijah. But before we do, questions or comments about the biblical Elijah or the story that we actually just looked at? Yeah, Saul.
I missed the class last week, but I wanted to mention Elisha because in one of the Haftarah that we had read a while ago, Elisha kind of copied uh, Elijah. He helped a woman who was poor,
Yes,
Shulamit, I think, with oil that lasted for a long time, and he also did CPR on her son
yes,
who
yes,
had a sunstroke and died. Okay.
yeah, exactly like, exactly. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. I'll just take, hello. Yes. Yeah, I can do that. It's an orange house. He won't miss it if he looks for it. But I can do. I just tell him that. But I'll step out for just a minute. Okay. Thanks. All right. I'm sorry to do this. There is someone looking for my house, and I gotta show him where it is. I'll be right back.
for any of you who are interested, that story about Elisha that I mentioned is chapter 4 of the second book of Malachim, Kings. It's in one of the Haftarot that we had read a while ago.
Kings 2, chapter 4.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Hello? Hello?
Now here it said that they struck the water. I don't remember. Did Moses strike the water from the parting of the sea? Do you remember that?
No,
When the sea,
I don't remember that. No,
I don't. I mean, I don't.
that'll be in this week's parsha.
Okay. I'm sorry. PSE&G is looking for our house. I think they're on the wrong street. Anyway, so yes, Elisha does perform the miracles, repeats Elijah's miracles. We just saw it in one instance. And more than that, as I mentioned last time, what's really interesting to me is that the stories about Jesus in the Christian Bible seem to really be based around Elijah. Some of the same miracles, reviving the dead, feeding the multitudes with just a little bit of food, seems very similar. Okay, any other comments about Elijah? Go ahead, Barry.
Rabbi Warmflesh, you just performed a miracle. You walked through the bookcase.
Yes, well, I don't know if I mentioned it to you. We took a trip to Portugal, and that's actually the library, the littlest part of the library in the university, one of the oldest libraries in Europe. So
And
I
Coimbra,
yes, exactly right. Yeah,
Tove and I were in Portugal. We didn't get to go to the library, which was
yeah.
a
Yeah,
disappointment.
it's actually hard to get into if to time it exactly right. But so I thought,
That was our problem. Yeah.
what's the perfect backdrop? Anyway, but it does have that kind of weird thing. So yeah, so we're going to move on to the rabbinic conceptions of Elijah, and I want to start. Let me go to sharing again. Okay, so I want to start with something from the Mishnah, and it starts, Elijah will not come to declare unclean or clean, nor to distance or bring near. This is the distancing and bringing near is very obscure. But in other words, not to make pronouncements like this. But so what does Elijah come for? To make peace in the world, as it is said. And here we get a quote from one of what becomes one of the Haftarahs. Behold, I will send Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord, and he shall turn the hearts of fathers to children and children to fathers. This is the Haftarah that we read right before Pesach. The great and awesome day of the Lord is understood to be the Messianic era, and Elijah is going to be the one who comes before, and what he will do is to make peace in the world. So that's Elijah's basic mission, according to the Mishnah. And of course, this is one of two reasons why we invite Elijah to the Seder. We have Kos Eliyahu, a cup for Elijah at every Seder, and it's based around this. It's also based around another conception, which I will, well, actually, let me mention it now, and then we'll see it a bit later. And that conception is that Elijah is the one who will, when Elijah returns, will answer questions which can't be answered currently. And one of those questions, and this is particularly relevant to the Passover Seder, is that we have the tradition of drinking 4 cups of wine, one for each expression in the Torah about redemption. God will save us, God will bring us out, God will redeem us. 4 different expressions. And then there's a 5th one in the same place, which is, and take us to God, which is understood to be the land of Israel. And so there was a question, a rabbinic question, as to whether or not there should be a 5th cup. There's a 5th expression. It's not exactly about coming out of Egypt, but it's tied to it. And there's a dispute about that. And Elijah, when Elijah returns, will tell us whether there should be a 5th cup or not. The cup of Elijah, as we call it, is really the cup that Elijah will tell us whether we should drink or not. So there we see Elijah in 2 different respects. One is as the predecessor of the Messiah, as we see it here, bringing peace to the world. And the other, as we'll see, the rabbinic idea is that Elijah is the one who resolves unresolvable questions. In the Talmud, sometimes you will see a rabbinic disagreement, and usually they're resolved. One rabbi or another is being affirmed, their position is accepted, but occasionally the discussion ends with the word teku. Teku is an acronym which stands for Tishbi Yavot, which Tishbi Eliyahu is the Tishbite. He will come and he will answer unanswered questions. And so whether it's drinking the 5th cup of wine at the Seder or other issues that couldn't be resolved, he'll come and resolve it. Since I've mentioned Passover, I also want to mention one other tradition, and that is Elijah goes to every Brit Milah. Elijah attends every circumcision. And as you may know, one of the things that happens at a bris is that there's a chair set aside, Kiso Shel Eliyahu HaNavi, the chair of Elijah. Elijah therefore can sit, and sometimes the baby is placed on the chair of Elijah. Why does Elijah come to every Brit? There's a passage in which Elijah denounces the people for abandoning the covenant. And as a reward to Elijah, Elijah gets to come back and see that the people are and continue to be faithful to that covenant. So again, these are rabbinic conceptions, very different from Elijah. Here we're going to see in the next source, we're leaving the Mishnah, we're coming into the Gemara, the Talmud itself. Rabbi Yossi said, once I was walking along a road and entered one of the ruins of Jerusalem to pray. Elijah, the prophet, came and guarded the entrance for me until I finished my prayer. After I finished my prayer, he said to me, "Peace be upon you, Master." And I replied, "Peace be upon you, my Master and teacher." So notice how ordinary this scene is. And notice also Rabbi Yossi recognizes who it is, and he, greets him and in a way that recognizes Elijah's authority. And Elijah says to Rabbi Yossi, "Why did you enter the ruin?" And I said, "To pray." And he said, "You should have prayed on the road." And Elijah said, Rabbi Yossi says, "I was afraid that passerbys might interrupt me. I wouldn't be able to concentrate." And Elijah said, "Well, you should have recited an abbreviated prayer. There's a short version. You could have done that, and you would have been able to do it without being interrupted." At that time, this is Rabbi Yossi, I learned from Elijah three things. One should not enter a ruin. One may pray on the road. One who prays on the road should recite an abbreviated prayer. And Elijah said to me, "What voice did you hear in the ruin?" I said to him, "I heard a bat call cooing like a dove." So a bat call is a heavenly voice. We will encounter that again later. And it is saying, "Woe to the children, because of whose sins I destroyed my house, burned my temple, and exiled them among the nations." And so they're standing in the ruins of the temple, and he hears this voice, and Elijah said to him, "By your life and your head, not only at this moment does it say so, but every day, 3 times a day, it says so. Moreover, when Israel enters synagogues and houses of study and answers, 'May God's holy great name be blessed forever and ever,' the Holy One blessed be God, shakes his head and says, 'Happy is the king who is thus praised in his house. Woe to the father who exiled his children, and woe to the children who were exiled from their father's side.'" So here Elijah seems to have a special knowledge of God. Elijah is also teaching something here much beyond. The first thing that Rabbi Yossi learns is a kind of halachic teaching. You can't go into the room. This is what you can pray here. This is what you should say. All of that. He's instructing him like a rabbi, but here he's sharing with him something of the mysteries, things that are not known by human beings, that Elijah, because Elijah has been in heaven, Elijah has access to. And in this case, what he's sharing is God's regrets over what God did, over exiling the children, that God feels something about this, that God has a sense of loss about it. And so these are our first two sources. Let me open things up at this point. Any reactions or thoughts about the rabbinic Elijah? And look how very different he is from the biblical one. There's no zeal here. He's just stopping in. He visits the world. He conveys information. And the rabbis are not surprised by this. This is just stuff that happens in their world. It's very, very different. Any comments, questions about this? All right, moving on. Okay. So here we have another source. Rabbi Chelbo said in the name of Rav Huna, "One who enters a synagogue and does not pray is called wicked, as it is said, 'Yes, all who forsake you should be ashamed.'" So this idea that if you walk into the synagogue, and here I don't think we're talking about modern synagogues, which have a prayer space, a sanctuary, and then other rooms. They were talking about essentially a one-room synagogue. And if you go in there, then you should use that as an opportunity to pray. And we have another source which says, "From where do we know that the Holy One is found in the synagogue?" As it says, God stands in the congregation of God. I just came across, by the way, a really interesting source that says, the question is, why pray in a synagogue rather than praying at home? Why is the synagogue better? And the source says that God is waiting in the synagogue for you, because God stands in the congregation of God, and therefore you disappoint God. if you don't go to shul. Rabbi Chelba said in the name of Rav Huna, one who prays behind the synagogue is called wicked unless he turns his face to the synagogue. Similar, but here, even if you're outside and if you're going to pray, if you're inside and you don't pray, that's a problem. And if you're outside and praying, you have to at least face the synagogue. And here we go. Rabbi Chelbo further said, when Israel gathers in synagogues and houses of study and prays together, Elijah said, their prayer is not despised. That is to say, there's a sense that it would be efficacious. And here we get another rabbinic source. A dilemma was raised. Does Elijah come on Shabbat or does he not come on Shabbat? In other words, when does Elijah visit? And it's a kind of fanciful source suggesting that is Elijah keeping Shabbat exactly? What's going on? And if you say Elijah comes on Shabbat, how can that be? He would go beyond the Sabbath boundary. And there is this sense that you can only travel so far on Shabbat without violating Shabbat. And Elijah would have to go beyond that. So this statement is suggesting that Elijah is punctilious himself in obeying the law. And he'd have to travel, coming down, I guess, from heaven. And how could he do that? Yet, if you say Elijah does not come on Shabbat, behold, it is written, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. Well, there's a tradition that that the Messianic era is going to begin on a Saturday night because the world to come, the Messianic era, is viewed as one big Shabbat, time of complete peace. And so the idea is that Shabbat will flow into the Messianic era. And if that's the case, then Elijah would be coming on Shabbat. That's the assumption here. I mean, you could say, well, he'll come on Thursday and stick around, but that's not the assumption of this text. And here we go, and let it stand until Elijah comes and resolves it. Yes, this is one of those unresolved questions that we have to wait for Elijah to tell us the answer to, or actually demonstrate the answer to, like the question of drinking the fifth cup at the Passover Seder. And this source is actually the most basic source which suggests to us that Elijah is the one who resolves unresolved questions. So now we get a completely different story. Elijah the prophet met Rabbi Baroka of Hosah in the marketplace of Beit Lephet. Very specific place. Another rabbi encountering Elijah. And he says to him, is there anyone in the marketplace who is destined for the world to come? And Elijah says, no. There's no one here worthy of that. And a man passes by wearing black shoes and without ritual fringes. Elijah said, this one is destined to the world to come. And this is strange because you're supposed to wear fringes. That's the basis of why we wear a talit. So the black shoes I don't know about, but Elijah says, this unlikely person is destined. And Rabbi Baroka goes after him and he says, what's your occupation? And he says, I am a jail guard and I separate men from women when a Jewish woman is in danger. So he says, I make sure, essentially what he's saying is, I make sure that Jewish women don't get raped in prison. I risk myself to save her. later, two men passed by, and Elijah said, "These two are destined for the world to come." And Rab Baruch says to them, "What do you do?" And they say, "We are jesters. We cheer the depressed, and when we see people arguing, we exert ourselves to make peace between them." I'm particularly interested in the fact that they're jesters, that just making people laugh when they're depressed is something that's so meritorious, it gets you into the world to come. And of course, the fact that they make peace among people who are quarreling. So, what we see here is, first of all, Elijah with special knowledge, Elijah tied toward the Messianic era. But we also, the rabbis are using Elijah here also to talk about things that they consider particularly meritorious. Now, I will say that this whole story runs counter to another rabbinic tradition, which is that everyone has a place in the world to come. And the rabbis, this Talmud passage probably knows that source. Nonetheless, this becomes an interesting framework for talking about who is meritorious and who is not. A judge was accustomed to accept favors from litigants. And these are not necessarily bribes, they're favors. Elijah appears, says, once you've accepted favors, you've already rendered yourself biased. So you don't have to take a bribe, but you're showing some partiality. And here Elijah is essentially just teaching the law. So I'm going to stop again. Comments? Questions? Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, I wanted to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Saul. Wait a minute.
All that you've done puts Elijah in a very authoritative position. I mean,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Elijah in some ways is the ultimate decider, right? And we saw nothing of that in the biblical stories. The idea that Elijah is scrupulous about the law, we don't see. In the biblical stories, Elijah is outraged by idolatry, and in the case of the king, by his injustice. But here we're getting a very different picture. The rabbis are essentially projecting onto Elijah their own ideals. And of course, we have this idea of Elijah's closeness to God, and that's part of what renders Elijah so authoritative. Sandy.
Excuse me. Is Elijah outraged by slavery? Do we know?
There aren't any sources that suggest that, but there are only so many sources. We don't really know. I mean, the rabbis tolerate slavery. And remember that these are rabbinic projections. So it would be surprising if Elijah was bothered by slavery. The mistreatment of a slave is certainly something that Elijah would object to. The Torah itself objects to it, right? But we don't see anything like that, and I wouldn't expect to. Okay.
Thank you.
And here we go. So here we get Elijah says, there are three keys in the hand of the Holy One, blessed be he, which he did not give over to an agent. That's just very obscure. I'm going to leave it. When one sees thunder and lightning, one recites a blessing. We see this in Brachot. There's a whole section in the tractate Brachot, which literally means blessings, about various places where you see where you say blessings. And here we go back And Elijah explains that these are expressions of the power of the Holy One stirred by deeds of humility. So here Elijah talking about why it is that people say blessings, thunder and lightning being a positive thing here, and what stirs God is deeds of humanity, both good and bad. Okay. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi met Elijah, and he said to him, when will the Messiah come? This is the classic rabbinic question. The rabbis are very troubled by the world they live in. Rabbis are being martyred. They hope that the Messiah will come soon, will put an end to the Roman massacre of rabbis. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why, which is during the rabbinic period, why Jesus was thought to be the Messiah. People are so eager for the Messiah. Anyway, Yehoshua ben Levi asks Elijah, and he says, go ask him. It's really a great answer. Don't ask me, ask the Messiah. So he says, where is he? And Elijah said, he's at the gate of Rome. How will I recognize him? He sits among the poor who suffer illnesses, untying and tying his bandages one at a time so as not to delay if he is needed. I think I think the sense of this is not his bandages, but their bandages. In other words, Elijah is sitting at the gates of Rome among the Messiah, rather, sitting at the gates of Rome among these poor, wretched people and tying and untying their bandages, trying to minister to them. But he's ever ready. He doesn't do all of them at the same time. He does one at a time. He needs to be able to be dispatched as soon as he is needed. And so we have Yehoshua ben Levi now encountering the Messiah. Peace be upon you, my master and teacher. That's the same expression we had seen before in addressing Elijah. Peace be to you, son of Levi. When will you come? And he says, today. So you can imagine that Yehoshua ben Levi is very excited about this. He goes back to Elijah and he says, he lied to me. Elijah said to him, he said to you today, if you would listen to his voice. In other words, the coming of the Messiah is up to you. There are two traditions about the coming of the Messiah. When will the Messiah come? When things are very bad or things are very good. If things are so catastrophically bad, the Messiah will come, but they would have to be utterly awful. Or when the Jewish people become so obedient to God as a group that they're worthy to enter the Messianic era. There's another statement elsewhere, not attributed to Elijah, but there's another statement that if all of Israel will observe Shabbat 2 weeks in a row, the Messiah will come. And so we really have two different pictures of the Messianic era. One is catastrophic, and the other is that it's in some ways gradual. As the world improves and improves, it will ultimately slip into the Messianic era. Okay, Elijah the prophet comes to visit Yehuda HaNasi. He's the head of the Jewish community. He's sitting at the entrance to his house. A calf being led to slaughter hid under his cloak and cried. So this is Yehuda HaNasi is sitting there, and this calf comes trying to keep from its destiny being and it hides. And Yehuda Hanasi says to the calf, "Go, for this you were created." Right? It is proclaimed in heaven, since he has no compassion, let suffering come upon him. So this is really a remarkable statement. He's the head of the whole Jewish community, and yet, for simply not having compassion over an animal, he is condemned. For many years he suffered, and during these years Elijah did not visit him. One day, the maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda was sweeping the house and was about to sweep away some young weasels. He said to her, "Listen, leave them, for it is written, his compassion is upon all his creatures." It was thus proclaimed in heaven, since he has compassion, we will show him compassion. And his suffering ceases, and Elijah returns to visit him again. And so here we see Elijah sort of as God's agent, Elijah as not willing to be with someone, particularly, he is the head of the Jewish community, and one assumes, therefore, as we saw with Moses, that the higher you are up, the higher the bar for your behavior. But Elijah now returns to him. And we're going to look at one last story in just a minute. But before we do that, because this is really a long story, let me stop sharing again. Anything about Elijah, the Messiah, any of this? Anything? The Messianic era. Okay, we're going to look at our final story. Okay. It is taught. The oven of Aknai, Rabbi Eliezer declared it pure, the sages declared it impure. What is the oven of Aknai? An oven that was cut into segments, sand was placed between the segments. Rabbi Eliezer declared it pure, the sages declared it impure. So the idea is that you have separate bricks. The bricks are not touching each other in this oven, and one of the bricks becomes impure. And so if the impure brick is removed and replaced, has the oven become pure again? And Rabbi Eliezer says yes, and the other rabbis say no. On that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forth all the arguments in the world, and they didn't accept them. Eliezer says, if the halacha is in accordance with me, let the carob tree prove it. It was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, some say 400 cubits, and they are not impressed. One does not bring proof from a carob tree. He said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with me, let a stream of water prove it. The stream of water flowed backwards. They said to him, you don't bring proof from a stream of water. If the halacha is in accordance with me, let the walls of the study hall prove it. The walls of the study hall inclined to fall. Rabbi Yehoshua rebuked them, saying, if scholars are contending with one another in matters of halacha, what right do you have to interfere? I want to point out, in terms of the tree and the stream, Torah is compared to a tree. Eitz Chaim Hi, it is a tree to those who cling fast to it. And Torah is compared to water with its nourishing qualities. So it's not really surprising in some ways that he's calling upon a tree and water. But when we come to the study hall and the walls, he just wants to decisively end this argument. And the walls do not fall in deference to Rabbi Yehoshua, and they don't straighten in deference to Rabbi Eliezer. And elsewhere it says that they're that way to this day. like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, only in Babylon. He said to them, this is Eliezer again trying to prove his point. If the halakha is in accordance with me, let it be proven from heaven. Let God decide. A bot call, remember we heard about the bot call before, it's a heavenly voice. Why do you dispute with Rabbi Eliezer? The halakha is in accordance with him in every place. Rabbi Yehoshua stands up and he says, it is not in heaven. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a bot call, for you have already written in the Torah, after the majority, one must incline. So the Torah says you follow the majority. He's not in the majority. And here we get the final story about Elijah. Rabbi Natan later met Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be God, do at that moment? And Elijah says to Rabbi Natan, God smiled and said, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. This is a remarkable story. I think one of the most remarkable ones in the entire Talmud. And so I'm very interested in what you think about this. Questions and comments about the story. Elijah's role here is relatively modest. It's interesting, though, that here, too, we see him conveying information about God down to people. It is clear that he is so close to God that, as it were, he could see God smiling. That aside, what do you make of this story? Anybody? Sandy.
Well, I think it's a great story. I mean, this is the sort of God that is comforting, the sort of God that you pray to. I mean, it's not the God who sends down brimstone and fire, and says, oh, you didn't listen to me, strikes you dead. So this is what I think, what people love to hear, stories like this. And
Yeah.
it restores my faith in a loving God.
Okay, I could give you lots of other sources that would do that too. The problem is we have both kinds, right? So I think that's true. You would think that if people would take issue with the divine voice, God, at least in the Torah, would not be happy and there would be terrible consequences. Here,
Right.
God is pleased. They've taken God's Torah and they've, as it were, used it to deny God's voice. I will say that we saw, when we were looking at Moses' leadership, we saw something a little bit similar. As Moses, God says, I'm going to destroy them. And then what does Moses do? He quotes God's 13 attributes of mercy to God, right? Quoting a text, Adonai, Adonai El Rahum V'Chanon, you, God is full of mercy. God is the one who revealed that, and now Moses is throwing it back at God. And so that biblical text also suggests something like what the rabbis do here when they quote back this text, it is not in heaven and you should follow the majority, right? So this is also, though, and what's striking to me, it is a remarkable assertion of rabbinic authority, right? We get to decide. You no longer get to tell us. You've given us the Torah. It's up to us to figure out what it means, and we're not waiting for you to clarify it. And what's so striking about this to me is that Elijah plays a role. Elijah's the one who's, popping in to resolve rabbinic disputes when they aren't resolvable. This dispute is resolvable because we have a majority and a minority, and we have the principle that you follow the majority. right? So it's not one of those disputes. Nonetheless, uh, Elijah is simply conveying God's sense of satisfaction that in some ways, the Jewish people has grown up. God, God is pleased. It's like when a child now has grown up and their parents can get nachas from them, even if they're not doing exactly what their parent is telling them to do. It's a really interesting kind of dichotomy. I studied this with Beth, with my wife once, and she said, and I thought this was really interesting. She said, "This is the end of magic." Right? That here we see really the transition from, in some ways, from the world of Elijah to the world that we know. We're no longer in that realm. God has given us the tools. Um, God is unlikely to intervene. It's a good thing and a bad thing in some ways. Um, any other comments? Okay, so let me just tell you what I want to do next week. Because I was going to start the prophet Amos, but then I'm taking 3 weeks. I won't be around, so I don't want to do that. So I'm going to look, even though it's a little premature. Next week, we're going to look at the book of Esther. And I want to look at the leadership of Mordecai and Esther in that book, particularly the leadership of Esther. And then we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at Amos in some depth. I like Amos because he is both a prophet, but also he has a political role to play. And so we'll see that next time. Any final questions or observations? Okay. See you next week. And remember that following that, we'll be taking a significant break. Have a good week, everybody. See you then.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Rabbi,
Yeah,
I wanted to ask you something off the cuff.
sure.
You know, in the Haftarah about Elisha and the Shulamite woman,
Yes.
the Ashkenazim do the whole Haftarah. The Sephardim stop when the boy dies. I don't understand why. They're stopping in the middle of something.
That's really
Any way
interesting.
you can explain? I haven't had any way to get any explanations about that.
First of all, remember which Haftarah it is?
I'd have to look. I'd
Um,
have to look.
let's think about it. It might even be, it could be Vayera. Let me see if it is. Yes, it is. Because of the Akedah. That's what made me think of it. And so, so the Aked, let's see where it ends.
In the Hertz, it'll say Kach Mesiyim HaSephardim. So
Yeah, I'm looking at the, wait a minute. Yeah, okay. So it ends with verse 23. Oh, it's really interesting. I don't know the answer to the question.
because they're leaving it up in the air. I mean,
Yes, they are. It is quite a long Haftarah. They tend to have shorter ones. but okay. So here is wait a minute. Yeah, so it's not the Akedah. This is the explanation here. I'm looking at Eitz Chaim. In the
Yeah.
Parsha, Avraham at Mamre extends hospitality to three unexpected visitors. Immediately afterward, he receives the divine promise at the same season next year, Sarah will have a child. There is no statement that constitutes a reward for hospitality, but in the Haftorah, reward for hospitality is an explicit theme. The wealthy woman of Shunem, who provides food and lodging for Elisha, is rewarded with the announcement that at this season, next year, you will embrace a son. So that's it. The focus for the Sephardim is on that, comparing it to the announcement to Sarah. The Ashkenazim are interested in the whole story. That's essentially it. Now, having said that, it's still a little problematic, right? Because they didn't have to go into the child's death. They could have ended earlier. I just want to, I should look at the, I want to see, so how many verses, if it ended earlier, how many verses would there be? There's a general rule. There's sometimes
Maybe 15.
I'm sorry?
Maybe 15.
Yeah, so there's a general rule that there are exceptions made, but generally speaking, a Haftorah should have at least 21 verses. That's kind of a rule. So maybe that's what drove them. If it's only 15, they needed to go further, but they really weren't interested in that story. At least that's my best speculation. Okay.
All right. Thank you.